I have Dave Jereb with me from Move About Occupational Therapy, and you have clinics in Sydney and the Central Coast. Is that right?
Yeah, and soon in the Lake Macquarie, Newcastle area in Warners Bay, we have two therapists working at a speech clinic there while we're waiting for the clinic that was meant to happen in Feb. But that should be out next month. But yeah, so three clinics now,
Yeah,
over
that's
20
awesome.
OTs that are all amazing humans.
20 OTs. Wow. I actually was going to ask you and you mentioned earlier in our little chat about the Move About cards. So is that where all of your OT journey kind of started, or how did your OT journey evolve? Tell me about that.
Do you want the short story or the long story?
Oh, I don't know, the long story.
I always start this story with before OT, which was my mum paid me $20 to volunteer in a holiday vacation care program. So I don't know if it counts as volunteering if you get paid $20 to do it. And I was only 14 at the time. I just loved it. I just had an absolute blast. And I was like, these people are my people. They get my jokes, and we have fun. And it was just cool. And so I continued on with support work through that time. And, as you would know, my sister was also an OT. And so I got to see her working in Florida in the school system and some of the work that she was doing. I was like, yeah, this really fits me. This is what I'd like to do. So then I got into OT and I managed to have a placement at Sheila Frick's clinic, which is where Jen was. So that was incredibly lucky to have that link. And that's where it becomes a love story, right? So that's where I met Kathy, who is the love of my life, my wife, my business partner, and also an OT. So we're a very OT family. And yeah, and I also met Beth Austin during that trip, who owned Beth Austin Associates in Chicago. And after a short stint in rehab while I was waiting for my paperwork, my first job was in Chicago in an amazing multi-disc prac that was very DIR floor time focused and also a lot of great training in sensory processing theory as well. So about 5 or 6 years later, we moved back to Sydney and opened Move About Therapy Services. So Move About's been around for about 15 years. I've been treating for over 20 years now. Our core principle is that we support the people who support the kids. So that's always been our families and our own team, because our team are the ones that support the kids and families. Now that we've survived running a business through a pandemic, we really want to extend that to our community, and that's particularly our community of OTs. And if I really have a particular interest, it's the mentoring and webinars and online training, and we're going to bring out some live events, because we really, our goal is to end burnout in early years OTs. We're just seeing so many people that are struggling. And before we were recording, you told me about you were one of those struggling OTs, I don't know, 15 or 20 years ago when you were talking about it. And there's a lot of places that just don't have the willingness or the capacity to give support to young OTs, and they're feeling overwhelmed and out of control and just not good enough. And they don't realize that's normal, and they're meant to be getting the support to be able to get to that stage where they're genuinely confident in what they do. And so we really want to focus in on those guys and help those guys.
Yeah, fantastic. And I think, like you said, like I was one of those OTs, and we talked about as well that I reached out to people, including your sister, and different therapists along the way to get that support. But that's, not really that commonplace. Like, people often ask me, oh, how did you come to know that person or this person? I'm like, I actually just emailed them and said, I really need your help. But that's really not probably the most common way to do things. I think a lot of OTs kind of suffer in silence, so to speak, or move from job to job, or just gets to that point of I can't do this anymore. And it's just, not really, it's not necessary to get like that. And yes, it's fantastic.
Can I just interrupt? That's a massive hot tip. I really think that's a massive hot tip. If you can have the courage to ask, you would be surprised how many people in our OT community are happy to help, or how many places out there are happy to help. Some get a bit expensive. That's why we're trying to offer less expensive for less experienced therapists. But, you know, if you ask me a question, I'm going to answer your question. So if you're asking for help, I'm going to help you because I love what I do. And our vision is that all kids, regardless of their differences, can have fulfilled lives, right? And I need OTs to stay in their job for that to happen, whether they work with me or not. And so it's the best job ever. It just makes me so sad when people aren't loving it.
Yeah, it's totally true. And I think like I'm always of this philosophy of just ask. The worst that's going to happen is you don't get an email back, they say no, you know, which has happened on the odd occasion, but honestly 98% of the time, if not more, I've had a reply and it's been positive. And whether I have to wait a little while or, you know, there's someone might say, oh look, I can't, but I've got a colleague here who will definitely be able to help you. I'll CC you in. And it's really, there is a really open and willing OT community that will help. There's no doubt. And actually, I'm not really that excited about doing webinars, but I love hosting just people and sharing what everyone else is doing, because I'm the same. I want to see, you know, good quality OT and programs out there. So yeah, kind of a really good collaboration, and I get to do these interviews and chat to different OTs about what they're up to and the cool things that you do. But so that leads me to my next question. I guess I've brought you on to talk about the STEP SI. For those who haven't come across this, tell me about the STEP SI, what the acronym stands for, and just, you know, a little bit about the model and yeah, I guess why you're on board.
Sure. Well, the acronym is one part of the tool, and it's a big part of the tool. It's the part that gave it its name. But it starts from a place of tuning into and understanding the child's state. And so this understanding of state is really important for understanding how the kid shows up in their occupation. I'm always pulling this back to person, environment, occupation, and I feel that the STEP SI is really a broken down version of that model. And it's easy as OTs to get sucked into a mechanics model where you're trying to fix the person. And, you know, we're good at what we do and we can make kids look good. But the goal's not to be good at OT, right? The goal's to be successful in life. And so we need to broaden that into their environment and occupation. So understanding state beyond this over-under concept. And I think this is something that the training does really well. So this understanding of state is not just sensory. It's not just arousal. But Tracy breaks it down, helps you understand that there's aspects of arousal, attention, affect, action. Action is the fourth A. And this, the way we draw these line graphs when we sort of talk about across the day is helpful, but it's not enough. It's actually much more complex than that. There's not just one line. There's probably, we can look at two different concepts in terms of how you are generally and how you physically react in the moment. But the detail she gives to that, to be able to help people understand, now I get this kid. Now I know where they function best. Now I know how things happen as events happen across the day. It really takes it to another level. So the tool helps you understand state. And then we get to this acronym, which is sensation, task, environment, predictability, playfulness, self-regulation and interaction. And really it's helping you look at how that child is functioning within that occupation, accounting for those things. And they're things you can also adjust to support them to better engage in that occupation or that task. You know, the model's really set up around regulation or modulation, but you can use this for all goals and moving from attaining to maintaining through challenge with using these supports. And so, look, if I was going to look at it, I always start at T. I start at task. And one reason I do that is because I do come with this great support and training in things that tend to be seen as bottom up, right? You know, so sensory integration or sensory processing theory. I have some really amazing mentors in those and a lot of great experience. DIR floor time, you know, you're starting from regulation and then you're moving towards improved levels of engagement and interaction. So like I'm biased towards this bottom up, and the criticism of people that have gym spaces like ours and that they never get to function, right? And I've really actively tried to break that mold. In our clinic, we say best practice is education, consultation, and direct treatment. The direct treatment is probably the least important. What I do with your kid is less important than how I help you understand them. and how I help you support them in their daily life. But we have, we have access to things in our clinic that aren't in everyday life, and that's helpful. So I start at task. What's the task we're trying to do? And then I can look at, is their body set up to do that task? So task, is it meaningful? Are they actually interested in it? Is incredibly relevant for whether they're going to regulate and move through it. Do they understand what they need to be doing? Are they able to see the beginning, the middle, and the end? Are they able to know when this non-preferred thing is going to finish? That's probably moving into predictability as well. There's a lot of overlap with these. But do they get the task, and is it achievable for them? Is it at the just right challenge for them? Then you can jump back to, and that task is happening within an environment. So that sensory and physical environment that sits there is also impacting them. And so how is that supporting their task participation? And then sensation is probably more sensory motor posture is how I think about it. So it's not just sensory for regulation, although it is, but it's also understanding the sensory motor aspects and whether their body is able to do this task the way it's set up. Predictability is do they know the limits of it? And then later we can think about what supports from predictability, visuals, time timers, video modeling. Just giving the information ahead of time can be really helpful. Playfulness has been added in. Playfulness, when you hear Julie and Tracy speak about it, it's really more of a joyful jubilance. It's about using that. Is that involved in the task? Is that something that can support the task? I just found, to me, I'm a peds OT, that should be inherent in task, and then interaction, which comes later. That was covered, but it's not natural to everyone. And so putting it in there to make sure we get that in our treatment with kids is incredibly important. And playful, meaningful interactions are important, not just because they're fun, not just because they're motivating, not just to get the kid to do what we want, but actually the neurons fire better. Right. When the brain is in that positive mindset and when there's meaning that they can attach to that learning that's happening. Right. So that's predictability. Then the self-regulation, and that starts with co-regulation and connecting those. Does the child have the strategies to be able to self-regulate? And then interaction. How do we use interaction to support them to engage within this task? And so that's the mnemonic. And then it's about getting them to participate in that task and attain regulation while they do it, and then maintain regulation through challenge as the challenge increases. And it could be another person is involved in the task. It could be that the task gets harder. It could be that you're in an environment now that isn't a controlled clinic environment, but it's a busy environment. So there's lots of ways that we can move from attain to maintain through challenge, getting those adaptive responses firing. And adaptive response is something that is so important to the just right challenge and to changing the brains so these kids can participate more in their occupations. That's something that Tracy just does the most spectacular job of helping people understand. And as this is rooted in regulation, just to wrap this up, I always bring it back to my favorite phrase of Tracy's: regulation for the purpose of what? Regulation for the purpose of getting in and out of the shops, buying 3 items without having a meltdown when you can't buy something at the register. Regulation for the purpose of getting dressed to get out of the house in the morning, right? And that for the purpose of brings us to a place where we have to acknowledge a task within an environment, and then we can see how that child can function within that. And this breaks it down so nicely. And it really is just Tracy hates it when I say it, but it's a cheat code. It's a really amazing cheat code for making sure that you're holistic, you're comprehensive, you're covering all your bases, and then you can take it to get a lot more depth.
Totally. And it's so, I love that you said about Tracy explaining things so beautifully, and how this wasn't your word, but it's the word I always use about Tracy. She's so elegant in how she articulates information, how concise she is. I just remember the information she shared on adaptive response, the just right challenge, the environment. It was, and I still remember it now. So you're right, she does go into that so articulately, and it's awesome. So I wanted to ask you, can you share a bit of an example, I guess, about say it can be hypothetical or a case you've already got where you would maybe apply this type of a model, or how it might look as a treatment session. Just, yeah, give us a practical idea on what this might look like in your brain. Like, okay, I've come in and I'm thinking about these concepts.
Yeah, the one that comes to mind, I sort of mentioned dressing. So it's not actually, I'm not even focusing on a treatment session, but I'm focusing on something more consultatively. So our team does mentoring with a range of OTs. I mostly am working with business owners, small business owners. And I was talking to this OT. Actually, this has come up in almost the same way it's played out twice in the last 3 months. Let's say the OT's name is Nikki and the kid's Jack. And so she's brought Jack because Jack's got a lot of regulation challenges, but his mum's biggest thing is that he just won't get dressed to get out of the house in the morning. And the OT's stuck, right? And she's trying to figure it out, and they've got all these strategies. And it's like, all right, let's pull it back and get a bit more information. And so, Jack is in kindergarten, so he's 5.5. He's got a 1-year-old brother. It's like, all right, well, let's work through this. Let's work from the top. So the top is task. All right, so for me, I always start at task. Task is getting dressed to get out of the house in the morning, right? This is a pretty run-of-the-mill thing. Is it achievable for him? Well, it is, right? He actually is inconsistent, but he can do it sometimes. And it's like, all right, so we don't need to work on, it's not about the task in terms of that regard. And so if we can jump up to the S, it's not about his sensory motor postural systems being able to do that task.
Right. Yeah.
He's got the capacities to. So we don't have to practice. Practicing that task is not going to help. And actually, unless we sort out regulation, it could actually make it so much worse because we're just reinforcing whatever pattern is happening here that he doesn't want to get dressed. But there is something about the task that isn't working for him because he's falling apart whenever we get to that. So let's pause that for a second. Where's the environment? The environment's in his room. What are the expectations? The expectations, back to task, is that he's meant to do it himself. He's meant to go get it himself. His mum has seen him do it himself, so she expects that. And she's just at her wit's end, right? She's like, every morning is just a fight to get out of the house. So I always hit the brakes at this point. I'm like, all right, so sometimes when we're looking at goals, we're like, well, who's it a goal for? Are they both on board? No, the kid's not on board with this. This is mum's goal, not his, which is fine because, A, mum's paying, and she's part of this dynamic system that is the child, and so their interaction is important. But let's figure this out. What's going on here? Why he can do it, so why isn't he doing it? That keeps on coming back in my brain. Predictability. Does he have a sense? He knows how it works, all right? That's along with task. He gets the process, but he's not doing it. Self-regulation. All right, things are going wrong. Something's wrong here. It's falling. Oh, I miss playfulness. It's certainly not feeling playful for him. And maybe that's an avenue in that we could look at it. So playfulness is something I'll think about. Maybe there's, maybe setting him up with sensory diet so that he's more grounded before this task could be something, but I'm not feeling that, right? He knows how to do this task. Interaction, what's going on here? And as we start to dig deeper, we're really, that's where I start to find out, well, he's in kindergarten. He's just made a momentous life step of separation. Meanwhile, his little brother's getting spoon-fed and cuddled and nurtured, and so what's going on there? And let's be real, dressing, when someone's dressing you, it's quite an intimate thing, right? It's not something that we're looking for, but there's a piece there that I think was more interaction and regulation that was going there. And what happens is they're always running late. It doesn't feel good, but there's a sort of, as you would know from a lot of the work with Kim Barthel, sometimes just extending an interaction, even if it's not positive, is at least extending that interaction. And so there's this co-dysregulation that's happening, but it's maintaining an interaction in an unhealthy way. And so being able to recognize that, at first when you go, he needs to be able to dress to get it. So you go dressing. We've got to do task analysis of dressing. We've got to work out how to teach him dressing. But hold on, he knows how to dress, right? But by working through this, the therapist was like, yes, he knows how to dress. That's not a thing. And so we can work through that. Now, we don't always have to work through all of those. Sometimes you just pull the sheet in front of you and you're like, yes, that's it. And then usually when we do this in all our group supervisions, we'll do it. And then I'll get everyone to sort of say, well, what do you think the linchpin is? We always hit the same item that people go, this is the starting place. So you can look at this and you can go, I think the linchpin is this. and you can work off that. And then if it doesn't work, you can come back and break it down further. You can use this as much or as little as you need. And the same thing would be in a treatment session. You're going to set up an activity to achieve a just right challenge in a particular area that the kid needs to work on. And then you can assess how the environment, the occupation, how the task, how those aspects are supporting their participation in this, and whether you're trying to attain or then maintain through challenge. And so, for some of our kids, just getting in and getting regulated is actually the challenge initially, but then we start to load on other expectations, and how do we support them through that might be how you look as well. Is that helpful?
Yeah, totally. And it's so funny that you went to dressing, because I reckon that's not even just dressing, but just getting out of the house in the morning.
Yeah.
Because it's actually probably the thing that is I was only talking to my daughter about it this morning, like how stressful it is.
It's
and
stressful.
how even when everyone's relatively regulated, it's still stressful because you've just got to be somewhere at a certain time and there's so much to do. And unless I'm setting my alarm for 4 a.m., I'm like, it's always a rush, and, managing 2 kids and whatever. But we're talking about how different our stress responses might be when I don't have to start work until 10 compared to when I have to start work at 8:30. We're just talking about, just that. Anyway, so it came up. So it's so funny you spoke about, getting dressed as the thing, or getting out of the door, because I think that would be one of the biggest things that pops up for families when there are behavioural things going on, or what they find are the hardest behaviours or the hardest times of day. And B, so often it is the child just wanting to extend the interaction or have some connection. I just think it's such a fascinating thing that you've gone straight to.
Well, it's so OT, isn't it? And it's so not what probably people think of our clinic in terms of OT. But it is real. It's for these kids in their daily life. Just to let you know where we sort of went with this, and then a month later, I caught up with this therapy. So this therapist was happy to then go to mum and say, you know what? You were such an important person to this kid. And this is a nurturing thing. He's watching his brother be nurtured. He's separating from you from school. This kid is really capable. You're not going to be dressing him, when he's grown up and married and got a job and all that sort of stuff.
Right.
In fact, he's not going to let you do that when he's a teenager. This is not a long-term problem. You don't have to worry that this is a sign that you're going to be doing this for the rest of his life. That's not a thing. So then you got to decide, is it still an important thing now, or is it something that we can just what's the why? What are the 5 whys that you work through? Why is this important to you? It's because we want to get out of the house without being stressed, is what it comes to. And it's like, well, maybe help him get dressed. And that was what they got to. And the way we phrased it is giving mum an opportunity to say, looks like you want mum to take care of you this morning. How about I give you a hand with this? And just working from that frame. And then it can be, all right, I'll hold it open. You put your head in. Once you've got it over the kid's head, they're going to put their arms in and you're doing it. So you might find that then you're getting him to do 80% of it anyway, but you're doing it in a way that feels good. You're fostering your relationship rather than breaking it down, and breaking it down because you're trying to do something for him long term, right? It's you want the best. The mum wants the best for him, wants him to be independent, wants him to feel successful. But he wants that quality time. That there's a way that I think a little bit of support, I bet he'll have no problem stressing. Like, he has no problem stressing himself, but this won't be an issue. And it's not an issue now that mum sees, he wants some time with me. I'm going to give him some time and we'll do it together and fade out that support. So mum actually had a sigh of relief when she heard that. And it was really saying, you're important to him and this time is important. We could tweak this so that you can, and I bet they're getting out of the house quicker and less stressfully too.
Yeah. I think like a really key piece is how that was, how the therapist spoken to the parent as well. Shed that light in a really positive way. He's actually really capable. And this is, and rather than judging her or you're not doing this or you should be doing that, it's more about actually you're really important to him. So it's a really positive way of framing that, because I think sometimes it can feel really uncomfortable to identify some connection-based things or some attachments-based things, or, especially when you're really busy. And I'm totally resonating with it all. And not, and
me too. Just do as I say, not as I do.
Get your shoes on.
Get your
Just get on. Oh, let's go.
You can do it.
It's so hard.
We got 2 OTs at our house, and we do have to remind each other sometimes. Remember, just kids. Right. It's fine.
Anyway, yeah, so I was just thinking about, how nice it is to have that positive way of reframing it to mum, so it doesn't kind of insert shame for her. But I was also thinking about how much this whole idea of being independent and, being at school on time and all these different things kind of almost just keep reflecting, and I say mum because it's most often the mum, but as a caregiver, it almost, you look like the bad parent because you didn't. It's so much of this is just like you have the parent putting the pressure on the child, but there's pressures coming down the parent. And I feel like sometimes it's so extrinsic. And then when you actually break it down, the mum's like, oh yeah, actually that's really what's going on here. So I think they're really cool points about that.
It's the starting point. And that's why, like, at Move About again and again and again, it sounded cheesy at the start that I kept saying it, but it came from our team. And it's just our mantra. We support the people who support the kids. We support the people who support the kids. The goal is not to be good at OT. We support the people who support the kids so that they can be their best version of themselves.
Right.
And that's the key. If you can, this is our phrase from the last month or so. If you can 2x the parent, you can 10x the kid, right? If you can make that parent that little bit better, the kid's just going to grow exponentially. It's not about you being the amazing savior. It's about giving some tools so that they can, love life.
Just some momentum, even just like just a little glimmer of hope that, a parent might try a particular interaction style, or maybe start to nurture a bit more with the dressing, and then you might just have such an easy morning that then opens up less stress for mum and more opportunity for a happy time in the car on the way to school, and it kind of snowballs. And I think too about that situation. I often say more to teachers, but even mums and dads, is how much time you have to invest in saying, get your shoes on. Why aren't you dressed yet? Why are you still sitting there? Like, there's so much time goes into that, and you expect it's done, and then when it's not, it's like last minute. So the time to actually just go and help with the dressing and nurture and have a conversation is actually probably far less than what it is to actually keep prompting and going back there. So it's cool. All right, so tell us about I guess where people can access the course, maybe the full course name, where you can get it from, how it's structured, like what it's all about, and just tell us a little bit about accessing the course.
I know you said the full course name now, and I'm like, I better quickly switch to a screen so I can read it. STEPPSI, a tool for effective clinical reasoning.
There you go.
Presented by Tracy Stackhouse and Dave Jereb. So that's the course. Basically, the course is broken into 8 modules that people will receive in 3 chunks. So you'll be able to watch about 5 hours worth of content over about a month. And then for people who get in relatively early, there are 3 live integration sessions. So after each chunk, there's a live session where we get and do Q&As and discussion about that content, just to make sure that it's ingrained. I think the videos are really good, and so there's some great learning through it, and you can rewind and you can pause and you can do that stuff. Tracy and I have a fair bit of banter at the end of each section to try and integrate that. And then we also have some cases which are really, we're pulling them down, we're picking it apart using the tool. Tracy has this lens that looks down on the sheet of paper, and she's literally filling it out like this, so she can fill it out the way people will fill it out, and you can do it along with her, and you can do it, pause and do it yourself, and then see what comes out and learn through that. So it is very interactive, even though it is a recorded course. And then there's those opportunities for the integration sessions too. We'll have 4 groups of 20 people that get those 3 sessions. Did I answer the question? You wanted to know where people need to go for it? Is that what you...
is it on your website as well as Development FX? I saw it on the DFX site. Yeah,
so Tracy is the director of Developmental FX. So if people go to developmentalfx.org/learning-journeys. But and also if you just Google STEPPSI DFX,
Yeah.
you'll find it. So it's hosted on Thinkific, but you'll also find it at the moment all over DFX's Facebook and Instagram, all over Moveabout's Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn in particular. There's a lot of content around it. I actually made a bit of a quiz that people can go through. That's a 2-minute quiz, and there's 15 questions. That's about, are you aligned to the STEPPSI model? And so you can answer those questions and just see, does it resonate with you? And
yeah, actually, that was what I wanted to ask. Is it mostly for OTs, or would this be something? I did see that the prerequisites aren't much, but one is this is kind of understanding of, you know, your foundations of SI, of sensor integration. So would it be mostly for OTs, would you think?
yeah, look, I would say mostly for OTs. I mean, I think there's a stack of great content that would be good for anyone working with kids. So, and certainly the neuro and the understanding of regulation would be really useful. I mean, it is an OT clinical reasoning tool. Right. Yes, I feel that's a tough question, right? Because I feel like OT stuff is good for everyone. And
right.
I don't want to water down, but it is actually
the tool. Yeah.
But yeah, it would be great learning, I think, for a lot of different people. But particularly, I think for new grads, you really get to learn the model so that you can have this framework to support you and be a bit of a structure for you. For more experienced therapists, I just think the neuro and where it takes regulation and, you know, motor learning and adaptive responses and just putting this together to get that deeper understanding is where it's at.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fantastic. And lastly, you're always giving little tips and tricks on your Instagram account. I follow it myself. If people wanted to jump on and follow you, just want to let people know how they can, see more of what you're sharing. You've got lots of cool things to share.
Yeah, I like Soph's done an amazing job with our whole team's done an amazing job, but led by Sophie, of our Instagram, which is Moveabout OT. We're really trying to get some great content on LinkedIn as well. So there's Moveabout Therapy Services, or connect with me and say hi. We have Facebook as well, and YouTube. We've got some great content on YouTube as well. Videos of some of our group supervision sessions, times when I'm just sitting on a beach with these beach topics. And then we've got teams showing activities. This is a lot of great resources on our YouTube channel for Moveabout as well. Yeah.
Oh, fantastic, Dave. Yeah.
There's some cool courses coming up too later on, some live things coming up later. So stay tuned for some of those. That will be pretty exciting. But for the moment, get into this course because your brain will thank you. Yeah,
it sounds fantastic. And like I said, it's really stuck with me. Tracy's work and Tracy's, at Camp Jabber as a practicum with her, walking away from that, and you just really felt like you're in really safe hands. And I'm sure with you too, Dave, I actually don't think I've ever heard you speak other than on your different platforms. But I know that you have a wealth of knowledge and it'll be a great duo. So yeah, fantastic. Thank you.
Thanks, Lee. Looking forward to the Return to Your Roots hitting Avoca, where our whole team's ready to come and party.